Good morning. Thank you everybody for joining us at our first concurrent session block on advocacy and civic engagement elements that are critical to support students' basic needs and creating some student-centered policy at all levels of government. If you happen to miss the introduction a little bit earlier, I'm Bryce McKibben, Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Hope Center. And I am pleased to introduce our very distinguished panelists today that you can see on your screen. Just to note that there is a Q&A feature open during this session, but our panelists may not be able to get to all of your questions. We do have a couple of our own, so place your most burning questions in the chat that you'd like for us to answer. Our moderator today is Michael Dannenberg, a Senior Fellow at College Promise, which is a national nonprofit that advocates for more affordable tuition and free community college across the country. He's the former Vice President of Strategic Initiatives in Higher Education at Education Reform Now, and has worked in a number of policy-facing roles, including the U.S. Department of Education and, just like me, the United States Senate Education Committee, the HELP Committee. He and I have collaborated on a number of student policies and civic engagement over the years, and we're very glad to have him moderating. Welcome, Michael. First up, presenting today, we have Kristin McGuire, who is for the last year, served as the Executive Director of Young Invincibles, a national nonprofit amplifying the voices of young adults in the political process. YI has been an absolutely incredible partner with Hope in the fight for students' basic needs. And Kristin comes to her role after having served as YI's West Regional Director with an incredible background in organizing, particularly in her native home state of California. She has helped pass a number of student-centered bills, including the California Student Borrowers Bill of Rights Act of 2019, the Student Civic and Voter Empowerment Act of 2018, and the College Student Hunger Relief Act of 2016. Kristin also serves on her local school board. Welcome, Kristin. Next, we have Rachel Sumek, who is the founder and CEO Emeritus of Swipe Out Hunger, a national nonprofit fighting on food insecurity in higher education on college campuses. Her organization was started as a student-run project at UCLA, working on allowing students and faculty just to donate their unused food and in their meal plans to students who need it. But the organization has grown remarkably and now works across the country to pass and fund legislation establishing hunger-free campuses, which you will hear more about shortly. Thanks for joining us, Rachel. Jen Domago-Goldman is the Executive Director of All-In Campus Democracy Challenge at Civic Nation. All-In is another national nonpartisan organization working with nearly 1,000 college campuses across the country, helping them foster political engagement and voter registration on college campuses. Prior to joining All-In, Jen directed the American Democracy Project at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, or ASCU. Welcome, Jen. Thanks for being here. And last but not least, we have Alex Edgar, the director of the University of California, Berkeley's ASUC Vote Coalition. Alex is also simultaneously an intern at All-In Campus Democracy Challenge alongside Jen. And I'm really excited whenever we get to have a student, because Alex is creating change on the ground with his fellow student leaders and can bring that perspective to our panel today. So we are really happy that he can join us to welcome Alex. And with that, I will turn it over to Kristin to kick us off today. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Bryce. It's so great to spend this morning amongst friends talking about something that we all care about so much. So hello, everyone. So glad to see you. This is an early West Coast morning, so I haven't had all of my coffee, but I'm going to do my best to keep everyone engaged while we talk about this issue. So when we're talking about student basic needs and where it all started, I would say for me, I often, even when I was a college student, I often struggled with the notion of starving student and how it was almost a rite of passage to be hungry in college. And I used to commiserate with my friends in the dorm saying, like, so like, this isn't normal that we don't have money for food here, or that one of us has money for food, but we're sharing it with all 5 of us, so we don't have enough to eat. And so that was just like an experience that I kind of kept in my back pocket. So I was like, when I grow up, I'm gonna figure this out. And so that's kind of what happened. In 2016, at Young Invincibles, in 2015, we were leading our first young adult leadership cohort called the Young Advocates in California. And we kept hearing from young people how, even if they were somehow able to get qualified for CalFresh, they still really couldn't use it on campus because the on-campus dining facilities didn't accept them. So we worked with the Western Center for Law and Poverty because they were hearing the same thing. And we were, talking to young people. We were working with the Western Center and really trying to figure out what can we do about this problem. So what we ended up with was AB 1747 back then, and that was in early 2016. And what it was designed to do initially, we wanted to mandate that state colleges operate cafeterias that will accept the CalFresh EBT card. We wanted there to be an ATM that was fee-free for EBT cards. We wanted to establish a funding account to support collaboration between on-campus food pantries and contracting food pantries, and codify the existing practices to include public institutions in the CalFresh outreach program. As you all know, when there's any legislative battle, we don't get all of the things that we want to get. We weren't able to mandate that the colleges operate cafeterias that accept EBT. We were able to increase access to food by increasing the likelihood of them being able to participate by easing some of the rules and regulations for on-campus diners to accept. We also, we were not able to get the fee-free access. And that is just one of those things when, banks had more money than us and they were able to we don't lobby in the 501c3. So they were able to educate and organize and advocate, right? And because they had more of the money. So that provision was removed. And I always say when we talk about these types of advocacy battles, you don't always get all the things you want, but that's okay because it gives us a fight for another day. But we were able to start to build those partnerships between food banks. And that was a huge win for us and the organizations that helped move this along. And I will say that it was because of the voices of impacted young adults that we were able to be successful in this movement. We had students who were coming from all walks of life saying, yeah, we actually agree that it's abnormal that we can't eat at school. And we had them providing testimony and writing letters of support, even talking to the news and media about how important it was. And that led us to our next push, which was AB 214. And it was more of like a wonky bill where we had to clarify the intent of 1747 and clean up some language. We had to define what halftime meant as far as students. We had to codify some policies of a CalFresh student eligibility work group. And we also had to clarify a new college CalFresh restaurant meals programs requirement to say that it doesn't apply to mobile food vendors. All in all, these two bills set the stage in California for us to continue to work on food insecurity bills, even up until now, so that students can have access and students can even be eligible, because the other issue we were having is when they even applied for EBT, the CalFresh benefit, they were getting denied for depending on who the eligibility worker was and how they felt financial aid was included into income. So through those two bills, we were able to clear that up. So more students were able to have access to the program. And then from there, we were able to begin to work on really cool bills in California. And I know Rachel will get into it more, like the Hungry Free Campus bill, and other bills of that nature. I'm not sure if I'm at time yet.
You're okay. You have a couple minutes, but we also want time for Q&A. So if you want to
Okay.
continue out for a couple minutes, that's okay. Otherwise, we'll move to Rachel.
Okay, well, I think talking about the Hunger Free Campus bill, again, we were working all together, and we met Rachel, who was really awesome. A memory I have of that bill is our former policy director, Kristin, who is now the executive director at Edge Trust West. He and I sitting at the table with Assemblymember Limon, and we were coming up with categories for the checklist. And we were able to meet Rachel, and she had a lot of great ideas. And I just wanted to say I'm so grateful and proud that this work was able to spread across the country. And I think that's a great segue to Rachel to talk about that bill. So you can take it from here, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Kristin. I mean, the fun fact is now Chris Snellum is also on our board of directors. So it's very full circle and awesome. And as that's such a perfect foundational also just context to say these bills didn't just happen. It was organizers, it was students, it was organizations who came together with lawmakers, right? So I want to remind us all that while lawmakers oftentimes get the credit, the relationships that come with introducing these bills, it comes down to advocates educating them on the issue and on the solutions. So as mentioned, my name is Rachel Sumek. I'm the founder and former CEO, stepped down about 6 weeks ago, of Swipe Out Hunger, which is a student-led organization that works on 450 colleges, started at one at UCLA 10 years ago. And now we run programs on campus, as Bryce mentioned, that help students access dining halls. Last year we acquired our dearly partner organization, KUFBA, the College and University Food Bank Alliance. So now we run hundreds of food pantries across the US. And of course, the third arm of our work is our policy work. And what I love about our organization is the fact that we're doing on the ground work and policy work, because you cannot separate the two. California, when we passed the Hunger Free Campus bill, or when Kristin talked about passing AB 214, all those bills were informed by practices that were happening on the ground on college campuses, right? It's innovation that our administrators and students are leading on the ground that informs what policy looks like. And then as policy gives the funding, campuses have the chance to further innovate, then further innovate the policy. And it's a really beautiful cycle if the policy and the folks on the ground are talking to each other, and they can actually advance what's best serving students, as opposed to what some policy wonk, no offense to the policy wonks, think the data says is best. It has to be a conversation with folks on the ground, with students on the ground. And so that is really the story of the Hunger Free Campus bill, the chance to have funding go to campuses to fund basic things such as, oh, sorry, I'm at my parents' house, and of course they have a landline. But the chance to have funding for, let me turn this off, one sec.
I bet it's a dial-up phone as well.
It might as well be. Access, exactly. This was a case study in having access to a basic form of communication. But the Hunger Free Campus bill, for those of you unfamiliar, you can go to swipehunger.org/hungerfreecampus, provides funding for colleges to pay for all the amazing programs that our movement advocates for. It first passed in California and has since passed in New Jersey, Massachusetts, Maryland, Minnesota, Louisiana. I'm forgetting some, but it's an incredible bill because states can decide how much money they want to allocate. In California, $30 million, no problem, write the check, right? In Massachusetts, $1 million. In New Jersey, $2 million. And then in Louisiana, no dollars, but simply having this bill passed unanimously from the state legislature and having there be a designation that says, hey, schools, you should try and become a hunger-free campus school. This is what that means. It means having someone that's enrolling people in SNAP on campus. It means having a food pantry, or at least a food pantry pop up. It means if you have a dining plan, give students a chance to donate those dining credits to their peers that are hungry. And every state works, we get about 2 different states every month that are reaching out to us, asking how do they get involved. Over 13 states we're currently working with to design their own bills. So it's really customizable, but it gets the conversation started so that we can talk about how are we leveraging work study, how are we expanding SNAP access, so we can actually get to more substantive policy, but it opens the door and it helps educate folks. I just wanted to lift up one of the ways that we are able to pass these bills in these states. It's all coalition led. So sometimes we'll come in and, for instance, in Massachusetts, MA had it down. They created their own entire coalition with various community groups that led the way. Whereas in Florida, when the bill came up, when we were working with the legislator there, we had to go and ask, hey, Florida PIRG, do you want to work with us on this bill? Asking different student groups, student associations, do you want to come testify? Do you want to be a part of this movement and coalition? And so bringing people in, not being afraid of saying like, hey, you seem values aligned. Do you want to join this work at the state level is really important, as was recognizing, maybe this is like news to me because I was not, my extent of policy knowledge came from the West Wing, but understanding that policymakers and their staff are not watching your bill as closely as you are. They might not know that in the committee meeting, there was someone who was, we had a committee meeting in a state I will not mention, but a state that's progressive, where someone said, you don't need the hunger-free campus bill. We have programs like Meals on Wheels. And so you knew this person was gonna come after that bill, right? And it was one of our staffers hearing that comment, following up with that office, making sure we educated them, because that guy, oh, there's my 6-minute alarm, because that guy was gonna come after and try and cancel the bill. So we followed up with the staffer and educated them. And when I say we, I mean our students and our staff side by side. So I'm excited to continue this conversation. And as everyone's been talking, talk also about how we ensure that students are a part of these coalitions and helping to lead the way.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Why don't we turn to Jen to broaden the perspective and reach, and then we'll go to Alex after you're done, Jen.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. And, Kristin and Rachel, I think all of the great examples and strategies you've lifted up are such an important part of the conversation and the work and the coalition building and the efforts to make sure that we are addressing the basic needs of students that too often aren't paid enough attention to. The All in Campus Democracy Challenge kind of takes a step back and is trying to hold higher education institutions' feet to the fire to say part of your job, elements of it both required by federal legislation, elements of it deep in their mission statements and the purposes they purport to strive towards, in terms of developing cultures that are equipping students to be active participants in our democracy. And so we talk about nonpartisan democratic engagement. We say that that is civic learning, political engagement, and voter participation. You can imagine, given that we're less than 2 months out from a midterm election, we're really focused at the moment on voter registration, voter education, voter turnout, voter access. And we see that as deeply tied to students' basic needs, right? So, the folks that you all are building coalitions to pass legislation with, we want to help make sure that we're paying attention to who's on the ballot, who is elected. The fact that so many college students, although certainly not all, are often first-time voters and therefore face increased barriers to actually voting, right? Part of it just being understanding and learning about it, part of it being having the right ID, part of it understanding how the process works, meeting specific deadlines, while also trying to make sure they have their basic needs met, right? Whether it's food or shelter or transportation or phones or internet access or right? We can keep going on. And so the piece we're really focused right now on is helping to do that. And so we have a website, allintovote.org, which is geared towards helping college students particularly understand how to navigate the voter registration process and the process of voting. It helps students understand where they have the right to vote, what they might need, how that might work. We also are really focused on the fact that the higher education legislation, the Higher Education Act, requires that institutions make a good faith effort to register students to vote. There's a lot of provisions in that, but a lot of folks don't know. And so how we help to make sure that in these coalitions we're part of, that we're making sure that students understand the connection to the basic needs that they want to advocate for, or other people who are trying to advocate for that, that it's also tied to who we are putting in positions, and that midterm elections in some ways and other local elections matter even more than kind of the presidential elections that get so much attention. The Department of Education issued a Dear Colleague letter in the spring that reminded institutions of this responsibility. And one of the strategies for doing that they highlight is the fact that these federal work study money and those positions can be used to do nonpartisan voter registration. So those kinds of, that as a strategy, not only for potentially also having those students work towards things around basic needs, so potentially helping staff campus food shelters, they can also be doing the voter registration work to be talking with their peers about all of these efforts. And I think it looks like Michael might be putting some information here, which is great. I can also put a few other links in after. There's also a whole set of strategies and toolkits available to campuses to talk about how you can create systematic ways to ask every student to register to vote, every eligible student, I should say. And we know from research that if each student's given 5 to 7 minutes where they're asked about this and talked about this, it certainly helps. We also know that they move more often as young people, whether on campus addresses or in the communities. That's even more so for students who may be housing unstable, and needing to understand that they may need to update their registration, even though they've registered before, because their precincts may have changed and different things like that become really important. California, which both of you have talked about, is a great place to vote. It still doesn't mean that a lot of students don't miss the opportunity for various reasons, right? There are a lot of other places that are much more difficult. And so helping students get the ID they might need, which becomes kind of that basic need, becomes a really important element of that work. And we also know, a lot of young people don't think their vote may matter, but we know that there are so many times and places where it comes down to a handful of votes. I watched a little Twitter clip yesterday in the New Hampshire primary where they were actually deciding who won with like a flip of a coin, or it might have been a dice, to be quite honest. I don't remember the actual thing, right? But that's the piece, right? And so helping students understand that, helping students advocate. And one of the things we've put out recently, I'll put a link to, is some research on the proliferation of nonpartisan student voting groups on campuses who are doing this work. And this is where I think I'll turn it over so that Alex can have a chance to talk about some of the great work that students are doing that tie all of what we've been talking about together in really powerful ways.
Alex, I think you're muted.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Alex Edgar, and as was mentioned before, I'm the director of the ASUC Vote Coalition at UC Berkeley. So what that means is I'm in charge of all of the voter registration and civic engagement work at UC Berkeley. To go a little bit more into my background, I like to think of my civic engagement activism as kind of a nesting doll. So on the outside, as was mentioned, I'm an intern for the On-Campus Democracy Challenge, organizing campuses across the country. And I also am an intern for the University of California National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. So really connecting the broader resources to college campuses. And at the state level, I am the civic engagement coordinator for the University of California Student Association. So connecting all 9 UC campuses in voter registration and get out the vote advocacy, in addition to some broader civic engagement policy. And then I like to think like the center and nesting doll is my work as a course facilitator and creator for a Civic Engagement 101 course here at UC Berkeley, getting to have those one-on-one conversations and class discussions with students, directly trying to explore the barriers and methods of civic engagement. So for me personally, as the son of a community college professor and a stay-at-home mom, education has been a priority of mine for pretty much my whole life. And that's something I've really carried with me into college. And I definitely try my best to, advocate for myself and my peers as much as possible. But one thing, all of my fellow panelists are definitely a lot more qualified and knowledgeable when it comes to data and specific policies. But what I would love to talk about is the importance of centering students in these conversations and remembering that as, experienced adults in the nonprofit or higher education fields, how important it is to remember that students deserve to have the agency and autonomy and ownership of their own stories, of their own voices, of these issues, because they are the ones who are actually being affected by them. So with that, I think it is really important to not just give students like a honorary role or an honorary seat at the table, but to really give students a leadership role when we are working on these various forms of advocacy, whether you are having, a food pantry or voter registration drives, that students are the ones involved and actively working on these programs, and also to include them in the program ideation stage as you're coming up with ideas for programs, because students know what connects to their peers oftentimes a lot better than the adults in the room will. And then also in the planning stages, in the implementation stages, and then finally in kind of the what works and what didn't stage, kind of reviewing how our projects and education materials, whether they were successful or not, and how those students on the ground were able to see their peers interacting with these programs and materials, that they could provide that on the ground feedback that oftentimes nonprofit organizations and higher education officials just cannot have that same access to. So it's definitely, I think, really important to give students that autonomy. And also kind of connected to that is the importance of student storytelling. And I feel, obviously organizations do their best to work with students and get their stories, to allow students to really take ownership of what their experiences are, whether it's, I had recently a conversation with a student who went on campus, and at an on-campus market, it said on the outside that they were accepting EBT, but went inside, grabbed a bunch of food, and was told at the register they're not currently accepting EBT. And something like that is not only bad for the students' financials, but it's also an embarrassment. You are in a public spot being told that your form of currency that you're expecting to use does not matter in this situation. And stuff like that, these like personal stories are what's key to getting, the change happening at the state level, at the campus level, and at the national level. So it's definitely really important to have these student voices. And also recently I was talking to some representatives at UCLA, and UCLA's student market just this year started accepting EBT. So that means that, for the past, since it's been founded, that was just not an option for students. And, LA is not well known for having wonderful access to, high quality groceries, especially, in the city itself. So allowing students to have access to these resources is really critical. And kind of connected to that, obviously a lot of the work I do is civic engagement focused. But I think a lot of what I and Jen work on is how students can really find purpose in their vote. I know a lot of the time when I'm reaching out to voters, they feel like their vote doesn't matter. Because politics isn't accessible to them. Maybe they're a first-time voter, maybe their parents have never voted and they just don't understand the impact that they have. But connecting the students' basic needs and the crises that students are facing across the country, but especially on their own campuses, to see how their voices and their votes can create that direct change at the local, state, and national level is really critical to getting students engaged in our democracy, but also engaged in the campus conversation around students' basic needs. And kind of my final point is a lot of these conversations are already happening with students. So I'd like to thank not only my fellow panelists, but everyone else out there who is doing the good work and fighting the good fight, because I know I appreciate it and my peers appreciate it. because this is, one of the many crises of our time. And I think we are definitely on the up and up with fighting against it.
Thanks a lot, Alex. That was inspiring, actually, from all of you. The chat is open. The chats can get kind of confusing for panelists, so please put your questions in the chat, and I will then try and pull them out and raise them with our panelists. But I'll kick off since no one's put anything in the chat yet. I think this is mainly to Kristin, but maybe it could be answered really by anyone. There's a grassroots and a grass tops aspect to organizing. Kristin, and I think this, like I said, holds for others, you've had a tremendous impact in shaping policies that young people care about a lot, particularly in California, and are active on. In my experience, young people care about so many different policies, it sometimes is hard to get a group coalesced around one thing, committed to that, and block out all of their other interests. What are some of the sort of grass tops and grassroots strategies that you've used to make your campaign successful? And like I said, that's for Kristin or anyone else.
So I would say what Alex said is key here. Young adults know what young adults need, what young adults want. So at Young Invincibles, the staff doesn't create the policy agenda, young adults do. So we have Young Advocates program, and we also have youth advisory boards across all of our state offices and our national office, who really, we start doing our policy agenda work this summer before, where we survey thousands of students and young people, 18 to 34 across the country. We have focus groups, we have conversations. So when we really start to think about what young people are caring about, it's because they've told us. And our staff is largely young adults, sans me. I'm young at heart though, so there's that. So young people lead our work. And so when we talk about the grassroots, and I put in the chat, when I think about organizing and policy work, something I've always kept at the core of my principles is that we organize with impacted people and not for, because we can't tell people what they need, but they can tell us what they need, and we can help provide the framework on how to do the advocacy. We can teach people about civic engagement. We can teach them where they fit in policy adoption. And so that's really our grassroots approach, where we're empowering young people to use their own voices to create change that will impact them. And then on the grass tops approach, like Rachel said, coalition building is key. It's very important there. Also, keeping a constant contact with your elected officials, and also being that bridge between young people and elected leadership so that they can speak for themselves as well. I think of our role more as a conduit, and not so much as the people doing the work, because again, we have to make sure the people doing the work are impacted by the issue so that they can speak honestly and earnestly about how they're being impacted or how they will be impacted by the proposed policy change. So that's really the relationship. I don't think there has to be an either or. I don't think there's a better way. You need to do grass tops over grassroots, but it always has to involve people who are going to be impacted, or it's not good organizing, it's not good change modeling work, and it won't be a good policy.
Michael, if I could step in just for a second, I think what Kristin, like all the pluses and snaps to what Kristin just said, I think the other piece I think of both based on what Kristin has said, what I know about the YI model, and kind of an answer to your question a little bit more broadly, is not only do we need to think about kind of grass tops and grassroots, but we need to think about the way those are nested in national, state, local campus politics and policy, right? And so I think, All-In tends to focus pretty heavily internally on the campuses, while also doing it from a national perspective. But because we are a team of 6, we're not trying to dictate what students and campuses are doing on the ground. We're trying to say, let us connect you to ideas, let us talk about what works, let us share with you the research about what works. We want you to create campus coalitions that invite students in, they have students on them, but invite new students in who might not be thinking about this, that invite local and state level partners who are doing nonpartisan voting work, who are doing other pieces. And then we want you to be thinking with other folks about the issues that students care about and how to help them understand how those issues connect to their political power and their voting, right? So I think that for me is kind of the other piece of the question you asked about grass tops and grassroots. But we also know that, you know, there's symbolism to some of the grass tops. So we ask presidents to commit to saying that they are committed to full student voter participation. And we have found through various different kind of evidence that while that can seem really symbolic, folks on the campus tells us it matters because it opens doors to have conversations about resources. And it goes back to some of what was in the chat earlier about time and people and the other thing that I've now forgotten.
Money, that was my point.
Money, that's important, yes. But open those doors to processes and things like that. So, you know, knowing that the president has signed this commitment lets folks in IT know, okay, yeah, maybe we should have a conversation about how you can have a pop-up when you do this that says, do you need to register to vote? Or, you know, do these other kinds of pieces. And I think it's that kind of full circle, it's that ecosystem around policy and change and meeting students' basic needs and helping them understand how the other issues they care about are all connected.
That's a great answer. Let me try and pull in Rachel and Alex. You know, both of you have mentioned, and others did as well, that there's a problem, there's a challenge that you've got in students, you've got a transient, mobile population with multiple interests. I mean, students graduate out of college, they move around while they're in a particular school, they change schools. And like I said, they've got multiple interests. What are the strategies you've used or recommend using to sustain student interest when you've got this transient mobile population with multiple interests? How do you deal with students who have sometimes extremely busy schedules, particularly older students? How do you make sure their numbers and their stories, Alex, that you referred to, get across?
Definitely. I know one key thing that at our campus we try to focus on is kind of meeting students where they are. So that's why actually just this week we launched a new program. Berkeley, we're called the Bears. So it's called Bears to the Ballot. And pretty much what it is we are partnering with as many student organizations on campus as possible and providing resources to them to register voters within their own organizations. So that way, instead of students having to find contact with us at an event or tabling to register voters on campus, they will be directly being asked by their peers in their organizations they're already a part of to register to vote and to turn out to vote. So I think that's one key factor, but also I think oftentimes with voting, but also with basic needs as a whole, whether it's increasing student aid or decreasing tuition or providing better access to food and other resources on campus we'll host an event and it'll be low turnout because students don't want to take the time out of their day to work on an issue unless it's their issue. It's something we run into a lot at Berkeley where students are passionate, they're engaged, but they're passionate and engaged about what they care about. So I think one way we've really tried connecting with those students, especially non-traditional students, is by providing opportunities for fun and engaging programs that are connected to these key topics. So each year we host a Votecella, which is a civic engagement music festival on campus. We invite an artist, we have food trucks, and we have speakers that will talk about the importance of civic engagement. We'll have tables registering voters, and we'll do a social media push centered around, activism and advocacy and voter registration connected to a really fun program. So I think those kind of two key points, meeting students where they are and connecting these important ideas with engaging and entertaining programming are kind of my two best ways of reaching students.
And I'll jump in on that, which is I'm obsessed with Votecella. Just making it fun is such a win. For us, it's always reduced the friction, right? So I think I saw something about compensating people, like totally, right? If you're asking someone to come testify, provide a ride for them, provide a stipend for childcare for them, provide a stipend for them because they're probably missing work to come participate. We have our students, sometimes organizations ask our students to speak on panels, and when they don't compensate them, we'll compensate them, right? Because we don't want them to lose that opportunity. And the second piece is, oh, actually, two more pieces real quick. One is we used to, when we started Swipe Out Hunger, for the first like 6 years of our existence, all of the requests that we got to start basic needs programs on campus came from students saying, I want to start this program. I see my friends going hungry. At the time that the Hope Center released all this incredible data and it got more and more attention, 2017, 18, 19, schools started taking this more seriously. And now a majority of our requests for partnership come from administrators, right? Which is incredible because we get straight to the source, but those administrators haven't talked to a student in days, right? So our job is to make sure that we train the administrators in how to identify students and bring them to the table, and not just one token student, as you said, Alex, but true stakeholders who can design the program correctly. So it goes both ways. We also have to train our students to not want to go and protest just because one meeting went poorly, right? Let's be strategic. School can be your partner. Yes, we can talk some chisme about them later, but like they also are, they're going to be your partners. So we want our school, our administrators and our students work side by side, and that creates sustainability, because whereas students might turn over, the admin are there and we create strong programs that way. The last thing I want to say is we hosted an event in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the capital of Pennsylvania, earlier this year, and we had over 100 students wake up at 6 a.m., take buses to the capital of the state and help lobby for the Pennsylvania Hunger-Free Campus bill, which passed, and $1 million is going to colleges now, right? How did we get those students to do that? They wanted to. It was one of their ideas, right? It was one student who had this interest, and a staffer on that campus who said, Ashley Delshad, who's like, I want to make this happen. And Swipe is like, great, we'll figure out how to pay for the buses and pay for breakfast and pay for lunch, and we'll get these students in, right? And a lot of the schools were able to pay for their own buses, but us reducing the friction from the beginning of saying, either way, we'll help your students get to this event was really effective. And we should not operate in a landscape where every organization, student or national, has their own campaigns. It really has to happen in partnership and seeing it all as one movement.
That's a great answer. You know, I kind of want to follow up a little, because I think you Rachel, implicitly referenced a question that was submitted by Juliet Schindler, who's with the College Success Foundation in Washington, which, for those of you who don't know, is a great organization and entity in terms of college affordability plus. They too have been sort of working to get the student voice more in policymaking, and recognize that it takes time and energy, and are sort of thinking about what can be done to compensate students for that time to share their kind of lived experience. I don't know if it's Jen or Bryce or others, you know, there's this federal work study funds which were mentioned, which are not insignificant. I don't know if folks have used those funds or thought about using those funds. And similarly, I think this is true of Rachel and your group. I know you all have done things like video testimonials for folks who can't always be there in person, and the impact on that Can anyone speak to either of those phenomenon, or otherwise further expound on Juliet's question on paying students?
I can hop in. What Rachel said is correct, to remove all barriers when you're having young people come engage in the civic engagement process. So yeah, paying for the transportation, making sure food, childcare, and even offering a stipend because many times they have to miss work. Those are all of the things that we do. Our Young Advocates program is the paid leadership development program because we want it to be prioritized and actually, you know, benefit the student in many ways, or the young person in many ways. And what was the video testimony part? We have young adults participate in any way we can. We have done videos. We have telephoned in. We have done social media videos targeted at elected officials. And I think a lot of these organizations do that as well because I see them. And sometimes we bring the electeds to us where they can meet many impacted young people at once. So sometimes we have reverse advocacy days where we have all of our young people in a location that is comfortable. We've done it a lot during COVID where they're virtual, and we bring the elected officials to us so they can meet with a variety of young adults at the same time over the video.
I also I'm dropping a link in the chat right now of policy work is sometimes confusing. And so we work to make sure that once we engage students in this work, they understand how we got here. So like literally a checklist, this link is a checklist of like bills introduced, committee, 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 committee. So they even understand why we have so many opportunities for them to engage, like what's going on. So like not undercounting the education piece as we ask students to join in because they've got a lot going on.
That's great. Those are great answers. As Bryce mentioned, I'm a longtime political hack and wonk, and I can tell you that policymaking and everyone on the webinars is made often by anecdote, and members, elected officials, love going to visit entities, organizations, efforts on the ground, and I think that's a great suggestion you made, Kristin. And you want to encourage the media to be part of those efforts as well, because that is a very good photo for the member, and then they are personally invested, which can make all the difference in the world between success and failure in a policy.
I actually love to hop in also continuing on the last question. So I know one thing for me, obviously coordinating a lot at the UC system, which obviously is an incredible group of campuses doing really amazing work, serving Californian students. But it is a state school, and oftentimes, working with private institutions, you'll hear how much resources and funding they get for certain programs that they get to do. I know I was having a conversation with private schools, kind of like similar role as me, Get Out the Vote coordinator, and they asked for one of our budgets. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll send it over. Like, we don't really need to worry about money, but it's nice to know what it looks like. And that for me, I was like, wow, I've been applying for grants for months and working on it. So I think a lot of the conversation is really based on the campus context itself and really trying to understand where students are at. Because regardless, even if students aren't receiving work study, there definitely is a weight, a time constraint of doing this type of work and making sure we accurately pay students for their work is really important. I know I spend a lot of hours each week doing this work for free for the UC Berkeley, just because the funding isn't always there, and we'd rather spend it on the programming that we do. But I do think it's kind of critical as a way to connect more students into the work by making sure they are properly funded for their time and effort and energy. Because I think we all know this is not easy work to do. You're dealing with topics and students who are struggling. And just trying to make sure that we are supporting students at every step of the process, especially when our end goals are supporting students, is really critical.
Michael, really quick, flagging that Alex one is paid as a student intern for All In. We pay all of our interns. Interns should be paid, but not my biggest point in interrupting for a second. The other piece is, part of what we're talking about is the idea of getting student stories in front of elected officials. The other thing I just want to point out is the other thing we want to do is make sure elected officials are getting in front of student voters, right? Or people running for office, more specifically candidates, are getting in front of student voters. We know that a lot of the data and research says that they are much less likely to hear directly from campaigns, partly because they may not be on some of the same lists as potentially first-time voters, partly because their addresses may change more rapidly. But one of the things campuses can do is make sure they're either hosting candidates or panels of candidates, particularly for local positions, one of the things they can do is let them know when there are other examples of that, and then also make sure that they understand how to find information about candidates and positions that are going to be on their ballots, because that's another big barrier, and really understanding what different positions do. It really changes. We have, we elect different kinds of positions in all different parts of the country, and many of them have really big impacts on the issues we're all caring about and talking about here today.
And so many of them have lived experience struggling with basic needs in college. It's been wild to see legislators come out during a testimony and share their story when they hadn't told us up until that point, right? So there's a really amazing storytelling opportunity there too.
That's great. That's a terrific answer. And of course, like I said, work study money can be used for students who are working at nonprofit organizations. So you can hire a work study student so that there's equity and pathways to doing this type of work. It's not just folks who have the time and money to volunteer. Maybe because I'm Gen X, and I won't ask if anyone else on this panel is, but for a lot of my generation, we sort of tend to equate cynicism with sophistication. And I don't know how much of a problem that is now with the millennials and Gen Z, but it seems like with respect to voting in particular, this may be an increased problem. Jen, I know you were talking, and Alex, you are working on this as well, about people who don't think their vote matters. And that's always an issue, particularly in a place like California, which is really big, or say at Berkeley, which seems like it's has a decided political orientation. But on the other hand, there's something new in that folks are also seeing voting outcomes questioned and not accepted by the losing side. And so if the voting system's rigged or increasingly being rigged, why bother voting? And I guess that means my question for you is, how do you get students who wouldn't otherwise be engaged, who wouldn't otherwise register and vote, to actually register and vote? How do you, and if it's not voting, maybe it's on organizing, it's a topic in general, how do you counter, on the one hand, the nihilist, and on the other hand, the free rider who says that someone else is going to take care of this, given the size of the problem and the number of folks who are otherwise engaged?
Yeah, I definitely, in a lot of the work I do, run into this conversation pretty much every day, especially at a place like UC Berkeley. Students will come and feel like they don't really have a voice in California politics because of its size, because of the very strong partisan leaning of the state and Berkeley as a campus. So oftentimes when having these conversations with students, it is an uphill battle. They come in with these preconceived notions. They've probably already decided either that they aren't going to register or they're registered and they're not going to turn out. So what we try to focus on is trying to figure out what issues does that student care about? Because at the end of the day, we could talk about how every vote matters, how in local elections your vote will have an impact, how many elections come down to hundreds of votes. And these are elections that are deciding key legislation that is impacting every person in this country. But what our approach tends to be is figuring out what that student cares about, whether it is, gun rights, whether it is immigration rights, racial justice, and working from there. Once we identify these issues that students care about, our work is, of course, 100% nonpartisan, but enabling students to know that even if they, feel like if they vote, their candidate won't win, that they are showing their, legislators that this is an issue that is important to their constituents. And by really, advocating for these students to take on their issues and advocate for them, we are able to connect to a much larger audience of students and really inspire them to make a difference. And I think one thing like you said about like UC Berkeley kind of having a preconceived notion of activism, one counterpoint I'd say with a lot of these preconceived notions about California and campuses like UC Berkeley in particular is, step outside for a second of these notions because they are oftentimes incorrect. UC Berkeley does have high voter turnout, But conservative voices on campus are repressed in a way that oftentimes conservative students won't vote solely because they don't feel like they can actively go to the polls and be safe to make that decision. And as a nonpartisan organization, like, it is troubling that a campus culture or even a statewide culture is actively going against an entire group of students, because we respect the right for students to have differences of opinions and vote the way that their conscience tells them. So I think trying our best to, work with the campuses who understand their students and their populations the best, and working to ensure as many students as possible get to vote and get engaged is really important.
Michael, the other thing I would add to the great points that Alex just made is we often find that there are groups of students who are already active and engaged in this, right? There are tons of Alexes out there, tons of various versions of that. There are also students who care, but are super busy, like I was when I was a freshman a long time ago, trying to pass calculus, trying to get along with a roommate, trying to navigate the different pieces. And like, if my mom hadn't sent me the form at that point to request my absentee ballot, I probably would have missed it, even though I was excited, right? So students need to be invited into the process in different ways. I knew that voting was valuable. I knew it was important, but I still needed that like kind of reminder invitation. Others maybe don't come from families who have voted. Maybe it hasn't been a big thing. They need to be told that their voice matters. They need to be invited in. They need to be given the information. And so, while Alan and I would argue that, students need to be talking to each other and doing these pieces, other pieces that, some of the programs, whether it's Votella or other things that Bears Vote might do, or Bears to the Vote, I might have just said that wrong, Alex. So if I did, I apologize. They're going to reach the students who are going to show up in programming, who they're going to wander by on whatever quad or in whatever student union or whatever else. That's not all students. And oftentimes it sometimes isn't the students who have the basic need issues that we're talking about today. So one of the people who they reach the most are faculty. And so can we create basic information that can go into a faculty syllabus that says, hey, here are the dates that have to do with where we're at. Here's the link for the campus website. You can go to register. Maybe there's some similar language there about if you have, food insecurity or whatever, here's where the pantry is, right? It's creating these mechanisms and these moments and these, some of them passive and some of them active of a faculty member saying this, or inviting a student to make an announcement in the class saying, hey, this election's coming up. You need to know that tomorrow is the deadline to update your voter registration. Or did you know that the polling place this year got moved from this building to this building, or that there's a van that's going to run voters all day from here to here? And so I think, you're right. It's the disinformation and the disengagement, but all of our polling says more of it is missing it for various kind of external reasons. And that kind of the number of students who say they don't want to vote or don't whatever, it doesn't mean they may not be disillusioned. It's actually kind of lower than the students who are just facing real barriers.
Thank you for that. This has been a great panel, and there's been not only a lot of general information, but a lot of sort of very concrete action steps that people have shared that folks can draw upon. Do you have any final thoughts, any of you, that you haven't gotten out yet that you want to share? Please do. And if not, I'll throw one last question, which is, I've never seen a really, really important policy that wasn't declared dead and buried at least once before rising from the ashes and then passing. So how do you, maintain student engagement when the deck seems stacked and it seems like the body has been is dead and buried when it never really is? So final thoughts or that question, then we'll turn it over to Bryce to close us out.
I'll just jump in to say, you tell those stories. You tell the story of how a bill gets out of multiple committees in Florida, which had no right to pass a hunger-free campus bill as far as it did, because students showed up, because you saw the face of the legislators be deadpan as we told them the stats of the colleges in their county that are food insecure. So you just tell, what we do is we just tell those stories.
Any other final thoughts?
The power of the people work. works, you know, and the more people that we get involved in these movements, and the more young people and the more students that really take lead and talk about these issues every day, the more successful we will be, even in states like Florida, like Rachel mentioned. And we cannot ever forget that all of the progress that we've had over these past few years are not because of our sole organizations. It is because of power building and coalition building.
100% to that, Kristin. And also, I would just say Tuesday is National Voter Registration Day. Next week, first week of October is Voter Education Week. We hope folks are starting to register, check their registrations, make plans to vote, and really remind and invite new voters and young adults into the process.
Bryce, over to you. Bring us home.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you, Kristin, Rachel, Jen, and Alex for your words of wisdom here. We appreciate everybody joining this session on advocacy and civic engagement to support students' basic needs. It's really great to hear the reminder of really in how we create student-centered policies by involving students at the front end and making sure that we are including them every step of the way, something that Hope Center believes very deeply in. After this session, we're going to have a 30-minute break before our next round of concurrent sessions begins. Just a reminder on tech, if you want to see the concurrent session that's on the main stage, that is just on the main web page, which is going to be on reproductive justice and abortion rights. That'll be at the top of the screen. And the other 3 concurrent sessions that we have going on, you can just click the attend on Zoom button. And this was recorded so that we have just a reminder there in the chat. This is going to be available to everyone who attended, and we'll be sending out that video link in the coming weeks. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope everybody has a good rest of your Friday and a great weekend ahead. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.